This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories, and welcome to my review of the Silmarillion. This is a book by J.R.R. Tolkien, and it was edited by his son Christopher Tolkien. I am also looking at the audiobook read by Martin Shaw, but I also read the physical version. I only use the audio version to help me more deeply understand the works of Tolkien, which I've done with all of his books, and also got a few for Star Wars books, but that was just because I had some credits and decided to use them for that. And looking at this book, it'll be a little different than my reviews of the Lord of the Rings books, since with those I was easily able to talk about them, since I've read them so many times. But this is my first reading of the Silmarillion, so we will be looking at the chapters, so I do want to forgive myself if there's any sounds of pages being turned. Well, I'm going to just try and keep it on the chapters page. The book might accidentally close or something, so I'm sorry if there's any sounds of that. But yeah, let's just go straight into this review. And also, I am sorry if I mispronounce anything. I did listen to the audiobook, but I am not going to the pronunciation chapter in this to make sure I pronounced everything correctly. So there may be a few things that I have not pronounced correctly because there's just a lot in here, and some of these chapter names, mainly the first two and the last two, I'm not sure if I will pronounce correct when I'm talking about the events of them or of all the characters, but I'll still try my best. And looking at the beginning of it, there is a Wandale, which I definitely mispronounced, and Veliqueta, which I almost certainly also mispronounced. And from what I remember is these two follow the creation of the world. And I think that was a really interesting story to read, and you just see how this world began. This book is more biblical in nature, and people don't really explain what that means. I think that's just something that people say about this. And in the way this is written, it is not a single narrative like that of The Lord of the Rings is. It is instead a basically collection of stories that move towards an ultimate goal, but you are not mainly following the same characters in this. You're looking at a bunch of stories that mainly tie into one plot line. The final two chapters don't really do that because they are more setting up Lord of the Rings. But looking at the main part of the Silmarillion, it is all about the struggle against Morgoth, or Melkor, as he was formerly known, although he is more commonly referred to as Morgoth. And with this, Morgoth is Sauron's boss, basically. More complicated, he is the most powerful of the second most powerful beings in Tolkien's world, with the first most powerful being Ero Iluvatar, and he is the god of that universe. And with that, he is very powerful, and although Morgoth is not as powerful as him, he is still the most powerful being that would basically be in the world, since Iluvatar does not actually go into the world and exists outside of it the entire time. So that is definitely something interesting, and he never really appears in the story, although he is referred to a lot since he is the god of the world, and it says that he has done many things, but with it he is never really seen, and you just hear people talking to him and him doing stuff to protect the peoples of Middle Earth. But yeah, with this you get some interesting stuff as you go into the Quintus Silmarillion, which is basically the main story of it. And with this is all the numbered chapters, with the first two and the last two basically being set up for the events of the book in the first two chapters, and the final two explain the events that will be covered in Lord of the Rings of Power. And with that, we learn this stuff, although Amazon does not have the rights to this. That's a completely different topic for a completely different video. But it's just something I did want to mention here, that any of the stuff I do mention here, unless it is also in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings, will not apply to being able to be in the new Amazon show that releases in September, I believe. But looking at the other stuff that happens just in the beginning of this, we get to see the introduction to the gods of this universe in the first few chapters, and they are basically gods. They are not full-on gods, but they are the Valar, who are the race that is basically the most powerful one that is not Iluvatar in this universe. And with them, we see many interesting things in how they do react, but we also see the fact that the greatest of them, Melkor, is evil, and see how he does just great evils throughout the times. He is eventually imprisoned, and this does give peace for a while, although he is released once again. And although he's kept under guard at first, he does great evils in Valinor, and that's where Frodo goes at the end of Lord of the Rings. With it, he does great evil there and escapes. And around here is where we get the introduction of the character of Feanor and his greatest creations, the Silmarils. And I know it might be a little differently pronounced, but that's how I pronounce it, Silmarils, and not. I think it's more accurately Silmarils. I'm not sure, but that's how I'm going to be pronouncing it. It's not going to be the perfect pronunciation, but it's how I will pronounce it. So, looking at the story, we have Feanor leaving, and he is being sort of corrupted by Morgoth, who is at this point still Melkor, since he has not yet got the name Morgoth, and in fact gets that name from Feanor. And with this, he does put mistrust between the Valar and the Elves. And with it, Feanor is greatly mistrusting. And while he is away, his great jewels, the Silmarils, which were designed after the trees that light the world, were stolen by Morgoth after he teams up with Ungoliant, who is a massive spider that I believe is the mother of Shelob from Lord of the Rings. I know she is related to Shelob, but I can't remember if it was mother or if it was some other relation. And with this, they destroy these two trees that go and light the world, which causes the sun and moon to be created later on. But also the Silmarils, which were designed to capture the beauty of the trees, were stolen by Morgoth, and this leads to something that causes many problems in the story, which is the Oath of Feanor and of his children. And they swear to get back the Silmarils by any means necessary. And this leads them to doing some horrible things, including the killing of their own people, being the elves, although they are of the Noldor, which is a specific race of elves. They still do commit some great evils. And they do this all to get back these great jewels. And in the world of Tolkien, Oath is a very powerful thing, which is shown in Lord of the Rings with the Oath Breakers, who are the ghosts in the mountains that help with everything, and that's because they wanted to complete their oath because, as I said, in Tolkien's world, an oath is very important, and if you break it, really bad things can and will happen to you. And with this, I think that things were just really interesting as you look at the storylines as they continue and just see the atrocities that the Noldor commit, but also get to see how others react and just the evils that Morgoth, who Feanor names that after he steals the Silmarils, and from that point in the story, he is stopped being called Melkor and is called Morgoth, since that's the point when basically everyone stopped calling him Melkor and called him Morgoth. And this is a really nice way of writing because you just get to see just the changes in the universe, and they could have just written him to be Morgoth the entire time, but they didn't, and I think that both Tolkien and his son did a great job in just writing that, and it was unique. And looking at some of the other stuff that was in this, you just get to see some interesting things as we see stuff like the dwarves and men enter into the world. I think that is definitely interesting to see as this world becomes to get more and more complex. But with the Noldor, they are just committing some pretty horrible acts, specifically Feanor's sons. There are still some that are good, and characters we know, like Galadriel, but the people of Feanor's house are doing some horrible things, even though Feanor dies pretty early into his time returning to Middle-earth. And with this, there was just so many other things that happen. We get to see characters like Thingol, who is a king who marries Maya, which is the race that Gandalf is, and is the second most powerful race in the world. And with this, we do get to see just so many other things that are crazy, and some of the great stories, which are turned into their own books. And I will be mentioning them here, but I am also reading those books. Currently, I'm reading Beren and Luthien, and then I'll be reading Children of Hurin, and then finally The Fall of Gondolin, since that's the order they do appear in this book, so that is the order I'm going to read them in. And as I said, I'm going to be briefly mentioning the stories here, but to keep the time down, and since I'll be reviewing those stories as a whole, I don't want to spend too much time talking about them here. And that's about where I am in the story. There are some things that happen, but of the chapters that I definitely remember more than others, we have the two longest, of which is of Beren and Luthien, and of Turin Turambar, and of chapters that are not covering the stuff related to Lord of the Rings. I think those were the longest ones of the chapters, since there was just so much in there. They were able to be turned into full books of their own, although The Fall of Gondolin is a pretty short chapter, and it's not super short, but it's about the length of the other chapters, even though that does have a full book also written about it, but that's even more of a simplified version of events where Baron Luthien and Turin are going over much longer events. And Baron Luthien is one of Tolkien's most famous stories, and one that he definitely loved. It is really his version of a love story, since most of the other books don't involve too much of the love stories, with stuff like the relationship between Aragorn and Arwen mainly being kept out of Lord of the Rings and was sort of on the side, although hints until it was all fully confirmed at the end of Return of the King, and we see them get married. And stuff like Sam and Rosie and Faramir and Eowyn only just happen quickly, and is mainly happening off the page and just told by Tolkien in stuff like the appendices. But here, there is a great love story here, and although I'm not a fan of love stories, I think that it was handled really well. And I am reading the Baron Luthien book right now, and it looks like there are some contradictions. I'm not 100% sure, but reading it, there's some things that I am not really remembering from reading the chapter. They seem like pretty big events, although they may have been kept out, but it seems like there are a few things that are a little inconsistent between the two. But I'll talk about that when I review that book. And yeah, honestly, I think that just looking at it, they did a good job with Baron and Luthien. Walter Tolkien did a good job writing it, and Christopher did a good job going and editing it together. Between these two major stories, there is also the fifth battle, the Nirnaeth and Noead. I think I was close to that one, but I don't think I had it perfect. And that is just another battle that led to even more death and the capture of Hurin, who is Turn's father. And with this one, I'll be reading this book next, and I think I'm the most excited for that one since it was read by Sir Christopher Lee, who was a great Tolkien fan and is the actor who plays Saruman in the Lord of the Rings films. And yeah, honestly, I think that it was a really interesting story of just such tragedy, since this is a family that was cursed by Morgoth and just some terrible things have happened to them. There is just so many bad things that happened to him. I will talk about this a lot more in, the review of the book, that book specifically, but I still think that it was a really interesting storyline, and there's also a little bit of a continuation of that storyline, although it returns to Rin in the chapter The Ruin of Doriath. And that was another interesting story, but one thing I did forget to mention with Baron of Luthien is that they do go and steal a Silmaril from Morgoth and give it to Thingol, and that leads to some major and important things that happen, because we get to see how there are two elven children, one of them being of Baron and Luthien, and the other being of Tor, and I honestly kind of forgot her name. I do know it was the daughter of the Lord of Gondolin, but kind of forgot the name because there's just so much to remember from this book. You can't remember all of it, but it was still interesting, and they do have a son named Eärendil, who is the father of Elrond, who was obviously in Lord of the Rings, and his brother Elros, who is Aragorn's extremely great grandfather, and that is definitely something interesting to look at. And he goes and, with his wife, they go to the Valar and plead for them to stop Morgoth because of just the great evils he has committed, using the Silmaril of Beren and Luthien to go and find his way to Valinor, and with that, although he's not allowed to return to the lands, he is basically given immortality, and his children are all given the choice if they want to be elves or men, and since he chose to be an elf, he was made immortal, and his wife made the same decision. And here it is telling of how Morgoth was defeated, although in it is written in an interesting way where they say no one really knows what happened because all the people who went and fought in this battle all came from Valinor and were never able to go back and tell anyone because they returned to Valinor, and this is text that would be written in Middle Earth, so there would be no one to be able to go and record what really happened in it. But in it, they definitely have some interesting stuff that does happen. And with this, we move to the final two chapters, which is Achillibath, and the easiest one to pronounce of these four ones, which is of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. And Achillibath does look at the Fall of Numenor, which is the realm given to Elros, the brother of Elrond. And with it, we see how they are slowly corrupted and want immortality, and how even Sauron goes in and corrupts them even further and sends them all to their deaths. I think that is really interesting, and I'm excited to see how it's adapted into Rings of Power. And although I do know a lot of people are just ready to pounce on the show and hate it, I am going to give it a chance. And don't be going saying I'm a shill or anything because you can see I have under 100 subscribers. This is the only channel I produce content for. I do have one backup channel which has every video besides live streams uploaded to it just in case there's any problems ever on this channel, and a personal account which I just had before and used to watch videos. So I am not being paid by Amazon in any way if you want to go and start throwing out those crazy accusations, and I'm just willing to give it a shot. I don't know if it will be good or if it will be bad, but I am not willing to judge something before it's fully come out, and I have not been able to see it yet. But looking at the final one, we get a very brief summary of the events of the Second Age, where we see stuff like the craftings of the Rings of Power, Sauron's war and eventual defeat, and the rise of the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor. And then we get another pretty brief going over of the events of the Third Age, where we mainly get the stuff outside of Lord of the Rings, where we see stuff like the decline of Gondor, how stuff is set up for Lord of the Rings, and stuff like with the Wars of the Witch King. Although, at the very end, you do get a very brief summary of the events that take place around the time of The Hobbit, and a summary of the Lord of the Rings, where they don't go and give too much away, and really interestingly mention characters by name of Gandalf, Aragorn, and Frodo, with the rest of them not even being named. I think it was a good thing to have just a slight summary of Lord of the Rings just to go over it. And I think that this is a really good book. This was not only a long video, but it's about 25 minutes right now, and it'll probably be about 30 minutes by the end. But this is just so much easier to edit. I'm recording all this before I watch an episode of The Boys because I usually watch it with my dad, and he's currently out, and I'm just waiting for him to go home. And honestly, I'm saying I'm not didn't have anything to do, and I was just like, I finished reading the Silmarillion yesterday, so why not get a review of it out? That's why this was not scheduled or anything. I decided, like, 30 minutes ago, I was like, you know what? Honestly, I want to do something and record a video for the channel. I know I'm not going to have enough time to do stuff for Clone Wars this week, and I'm going to be super busy tomorrow, so why not get a review of the Silmarillion out since it's just going to be talking for, maybe half an hour at the most, and I did that, and I had a really fun time reviewing this book. And yeah, looking at the narration, I almost completely forgot about that. I think that the narration by Martin Shaw was good, although I definitely enjoyed Andy Serkis a lot more in that when he narrated The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings when I was reading them for the who knows how many times because I've read those books a lot. I just really think that he did such a great job, and it helps so much to pay attention to the story because it's definitely a big one that has so many crazy things happening in it, even though it is just over 300 pages long, at least for the edition I have. So much happens in it where we get to see basically the events of 3 ages of the world pass by and years that happened before those ages. And yeah, honestly, I think that it was so interesting to go and read this. I had such a fun time and would definitely recommend it, although I'm going to tell you it is definitely a hard read, and it's probably worth both reading it and listening to the audiobook so you can have such a better understanding and also know how to pronounce these names without having to go and check the pronunciation chapter of the book because, I mean, even though it's basically a page, you're gonna have to go and keep finding page, and for me it's 310 and 311, and just checking that to know how to correctly pronounce everything, and it's so much easier when it's being narrated. But yeah, honestly, I would definitely recommend this book. As I said, it's a hard but definitely worthy read, and I do want to know what you think. Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next episode of Legends and Theories. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.